Hi, this is Joel Farkas. Welcome back to Remembering the American Revolution. This is part 4 of 5 parts where we look at how you remember the founding of our country. So let's move on. If I was to say to you, tell me the date and tell me the document that you're familiar with that means the founding of our country. Well, the date, of course, would be July 4th, 1776, and the document would be the Declaration of Independence. Let's take a look at this for a moment. So in June, notice it said June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee stands up in front of Congress with what we call the Lee Resolutions, and one of the parts is that these United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. So a resolution is on the floor, which means it needs to be debated and it needs to be voted upon. Now, Congress at that time was actually one house, unlike it is today. President of Congress was John Hancock, and he appoints a 5-man committee to write a draft so that if the resolution passes, then just the wording in the draft has to be debated. And then this document would be distributed and read to the citizens, to the army, would be sent overseas. It's an explanation of what this revolution is all about. So what you see here is the famous John Trumbull painting of Thomas Jefferson handing his draft to John Hancock. Well, the resolution is debated, and yes, we declare independence on July 2nd. You heard me correctly. We declared independence on July 2nd. So you say to yourself, whatever happened to July 4th? Well, the wording in the draft that Jefferson was the primary author of, that wording needed to be debated. Now, when it was all said and done, it was ratified on July 4th. And on July 4th, it goes down the street to Dunlap Printers, who prints up a couple hundred of these broadsides, which are then distributed to the army, to the citizens, around the world. So since it goes to Dunlap Printers on July 4th, he dates it July 4th. And that's the date that we know today as when we declared independence. Does it really matter, July 2nd, July 4th? Not to me. But I think it's kind of an interesting story. By the way, here's a little riddle for you. Where was the Declaration of Independence signed? And by the way, this is what they call the engrossed copy with all the signatures. And the answer is at the bottom of the page. That was thanks to my 11-year-old grandson, Zeke Farkas, in Boulder, Colorado. Also, if you said Philadelphia, you were, of course, correct. So let's go on and see. If I said to you, the painting, Washington crossing the Delaware, does an image immediately come to mind? Well, this would be the painting. I took this picture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. It's done by Emanuel Leutze. This painting is immense. It's something like 12 feet by 22 feet. Now, I don't talk about the painting in this particular lecture. I do talk about it more in a different lecture. The painting represents the beginning of what we call the Battle of Trenton, as in Trenton, New Jersey. So, anybody remember the Kingston Trio and their song, the MTA? So the opening words to this song, these are the times that try men's souls. Why am I reading you this? Because these words were written by Thomas Paine, the same Thomas Paine we spoke about in the previous lecture. Thomas Paine is with the Army. He's kind of like a foreign correspondent for to use today's terms. And Washington's army is in really bad shape. He's down to about 3,000 men. Many of them are going to be leaving because their one-year contract is about to expire. And Thomas Paine writes what's called the American Crisis. And this is the opening lines. This is very influential in keeping his army together. So let's go back for a moment to the painting. Here's Thomas Paine, by the way. Let's go back to a moment to the painting. So I blew up the center of it, and you see, of course, you see Washington in the front. Now look at the man standing behind Washington holding the flag. That is Lieutenant James Monroe. Now, if that name rings a bell, it's because he was our fifth president. Well, Monroe was at the Battle of Trenton. Now, he was not on the same boat as Washington, and as I said, I go into the painting itself and really what the painting meant and what it was all about in a different lecture. Well, at any rate, Monroe's assignment is to make sure that the roads to Trenton are clear and that nobody goes on it, which might give away the Army's surprise attack. So he and other men are there, and a local citizen hears this noise, and he goes out and he says, "What's all the commotion?" And Monroe explains the story, and he said, "Well, look, I'm a doctor. Why don't I come with you? Because you might need me." And Monroe says, "Great." So this is a famous painting, again by John Trumbull. This is the Battle of Trenton, and of course Washington wins this battle. This was actually Washington's first victory as a commander in the field. Now, I blew up another part of it, and if you look on the ground, you'll see Monroe, and right above him, kind of supporting him, is the doctor. So what is this all about? Well, Monroe in the Battle of Trenton is shot in the shoulder, and the bullet nicks an artery, and Monroe was basically bleeding to death. And the doctor comes up, puts his finger in the hole, is able to stop the bleeding, can't find the bullet, and just leaves it there. So Monroe spent the rest of his life with a bullet in his shoulder. We have another president, by the way, who also, the same thing happened. Andrew Jackson was shot in a duel, and the bullet was near his heart. The doctors were afraid to try to take out the bullet, so they just left it there. And it didn't affect him. So think of the odds of this story, though, because, I mean, here they are walking down the street, down the road. We're like, what if the doctor had been in the bathroom or something? As Washington would say, it was providence, or it was fate, or it was meant to be. So if I was to say to you, who was the traitor, maybe the most famous traitor in American history, who would you say? And look at this title, America's Greatest General, until he wasn't. Now, this is a picture of that man, and of course we're talking about Benedict Arnold. Now, in the beginning of the war, Arnold was a hero. He was the only officer, for the most part, that Washington had who was winning anything. And then, of course, he changes sides. But while he was a hero, he had some major successes, and over the years, it becomes a question of how to acknowledge his successes. Do we acknowledge him? So his first success was in capturing Fort Ticonderoga. Without going into the whole story, again, I go into that in a different lecture. Here is a marker, and they do not mention Benedict Arnold at all. Now, Arnold was kind of co-commander with Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys, so you'll see in this marker, they mention Ethan Allen. Benedict Arnold's name is nowhere to be found. Now, Arnold on assignment goes up to Canada to try to capture Quebec City. In that battle, he's shot in the leg. They're not successful in trying to capture Quebec City, but Arnold nonetheless comes back as a hero because of all the odds and hardships that he had to overcome just to get to Quebec City. So here is a marker where they mention his name. Now, Arnold went up through the state of Maine in the wintertime, if you can imagine this, and forget roads, by the way. So here's a marker where he is mentioned, where his name is mentioned. Which leads me to the Battle of Valcour Island. Washington gets word the British are sending a fleet down from Canada. He goes to Arnold and he says, you need to stop them. Arnold builds a fleet of small ships, and although they lose the battle, they delay the British long enough that the British have to go back up to Canada before the ice traps their ships. So here's a marker which mentions Arnold. At the same time, here's a different marker regarding Valcour Island that does not mention Arnold, which leads me to the final one, Saratoga. As you can tell from this picture, Arnold is the hero of Saratoga. In this battle, he was shot again in the same leg that he was shot in up in Canada. This was arguably the most important battle of the war. And the question now becomes, how do you acknowledge Arnold's victory, and do you mention his name? Well, if you ever go to the Saratoga battlefield, you will find what they call the Boot Monument. There it is. They don't mention Arnold by name, but they acknowledge him in basically the leg in which he was shot in twice. So what was so important about this battle? Well, this was the battle that persuaded the King of France to support the revolution. Up until that point, the King of France, he was reluctant to do so. He needed to see some sign, if you will, that this upstart, untrained army could defeat the British army. And this was the battle that showed him that it was possible. Now, the King of France was Louis XVI, all right? Who was his wife? For those of you who said Marie Antoinette, you are correct. If there's one French queen, for some reason we all seem to know about, it was Marie Antoinette. Now, why is that? Well, in many cases, it's because she said, let them eat cake. Sound familiar? Well, guess what? She never said it. There was no proof that she ever uttered those words. You know, there are a lot of myths and legends and whatever. I'm going to tell you another one since we're on the subject of France, France, and it's about Napoleon. Was Napoleon short? Well, the answer is no. Napoleon was not short. He was actually pretty average for his time. And the confusion was, at his death, there was an autopsy, and he was measured in the French centimeters, and he came out about 5 feet 2 inches. However, we're on the British system. And on that system, he basically was 5 feet 6.5 inches, which was about average for a man at that time. So that's another one of the myths, which are really kind of fun, I think. And I have other ones in my lectures. So that concludes part 4. On the screen is my contact information. If you have any questions, comments, requests, whatever it might be, I would love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks for watching.